The first thing I noticed was the empty chair, and I had no idea that one forgotten seat would change the way I saw my entire world. I had spent years believing that every detail in my home reflected success. The polished floors, the towering windows, the carefully arranged rooms. Everything existed because I demanded perfection. My name was Adrian Calloway, and people knew me as a man who controlled every corner of his life. My estate was built on discipline. Every schedule was organized. Every decision had a purpose. Every person knew their role. That was how I preferred things. Order was comfortable. Distance was safe. But there was one thing I never noticed. The people who helped maintain my world were always standing around the edges of it. I saw their work. I saw their responsibilities. I saw the results of their efforts. But I rarely saw them. That changed on a quiet evening when I entered the dining room earlier than expected. The room was prepared for dinner, as usual. The silverware was perfectly aligned. The lights above the long table created a warm glow across the polished surface. Everything looked exactly the way it always did. Except for one thing. One chair near the end of the table remained empty. It was not unusual for chairs to be empty in my home. The dining table was large enough for 20 people, but most nights I ate alone. What caught my attention was not the empty chair itself. It was the small plate placed beside it. A simple meal. Nothing expensive. Nothing carefully arranged by a chef. Just a quiet reminder that someone had been there. "Whose is that?" I asked when Margaret, the head of household staff, entered the room. She looked toward the chair and paused. Just for a second. But I noticed. "It belongs to Emily's daughter," she answered. I looked at her. "Lily." Margaret nodded. "She sometimes waits nearby while Emily finishes her work." I looked back at the chair. Why has nobody told me this before? Margaret did not answer immediately. That silence said more than words could. The truth was simple. Nobody thought I wanted to know. That bothered me more than I expected. Emily Carter had worked in my estate for years. She was reliable, respectful, always on time. The kind of person everyone depended on, but few people truly understood. The next morning, I began noticing things I had ignored. Emily arrived before sunrise. She prepared rooms, organized schedules, and handled countless details without asking for recognition. Her daughter Lily waited quietly after school, often reading books in corners of the house while her mother worked. She was not causing problems. She was simply trying to stay close to the person who meant everything to her. That afternoon, I saw Lily standing near the garden with a small notebook in her hands. She was drawing pictures of flowers and trees. When she noticed me, she quickly stood up. "I hope I am not in the way," she said. The word surprised me. A child should not feel like she was an inconvenience for existing. "You are not in the way," I told her. She looked uncertain. "My mom says we should always be respectful." I looked toward the mansion behind her. "Respect does not mean you have to disappear." She looked at me like she was trying to understand those words. Maybe because nobody had ever said them to her before. That evening, I found myself standing in the dining room again. The empty chair was still there. The small plate was gone, but the feeling remained. I had spent years protecting my empire, making sure everything inside it was perfect. Yet somehow, I had missed the most important details. The people, the stories, the quiet moments happening right in front of me. For the first time, I wondered how many other things I had failed to see, and I knew I needed an answer. Not as a businessman, not as someone with power, but as a person who had finally realized that an empty chair could reveal a truth louder than any conversation. I used to think the hardest questions were the ones asked during business meetings, when every answer could change the future of a company. I was wrong. The hardest questions were the ones that forced me to look at myself. The morning after I noticed the empty chair in the dining room, I found myself paying attention to things I had ignored for years. The estate looked the same. The marble floors still reflected the sunlight. The tall windows still overlooked the perfectly maintained gardens. The staff still followed their daily routines. But something had changed. I had changed. I started noticing the small details. The way Emily Carter always carried extra books for Lily because her daughter loved reading during quiet moments. The way she smiled whenever Lily shared a new drawing. The way she always made sure everyone else was comfortable before thinking about herself. For years, I had mistaken silence for peace. Now I was beginning to understand that sometimes silence meant people were simply afraid to speak. That afternoon, I asked Emily to meet me in my office. When she walked in, she looked uncertain. Not because she had done anything wrong, Because people like Emily were used to being called into offices when there was a problem. Please sit down, I said. She carefully took the chair across from my desk. Is everything okay, Mr. Calloway? She asked. I looked at her for a moment before answering. That is what I wanted to ask you. She seemed confused. Me? I nodded. Yes. I realized something recently. I know your work. I know your responsibilities. But I do not know your story. Her expression changed slightly. It was the first time I saw her without the professional mask she wore every day. My story is not very interesting, she said quietly. I shook my head. Everyone has a story. Most people just never get asked about it. The room became quiet. Emily looked toward the window before speaking. She told me about Lily. About how she had spent years trying to create a stable life for her daughter. About how every decision she made was based on one simple goal. Making sure Lily felt safe, loved, and supported. She never described herself as struggling. She never asked for sympathy. She only talked about responsibility. That was the part one could not stop thinking about. She carried challenges the same way I carried pressure. Quietly, without letting anyone see the weight. Why did you never tell me anything? I asked. Emily gave a small smile. Because I did not want to be treated differently. Her answer surprised me. Differently? She nodded. Sometimes when people discover someone needs help, they stop seeing the person. They only see the situation. I looked down at my desk. Those words stayed with me. I had always believed providing solutions was the same as understanding people. But maybe I had been wrong. A solution could fix a problem. It could not always heal the feeling of being unseen. Later that day, I found Lily in the library again. She was sitting on the floor surrounded by books. When she noticed me, she smiled. Did you talk to my mom? She asked. I nodded. Yes. She looked curious. Was she worried? I thought about the question. She was worried that she had caused trouble. Lily looked confused. But she did not do anything wrong. Her simple answer felt heavier than any complicated explanation. You are right, I said. She did not. Lily returned to her book, completely unaware that her words had reminded me of something important. People often spend years apologizing for things they should never have to apologize for. Their circumstances, their needs, their hopes. That evening, I walked past the dining room again. The chair that had started all these questions was still there. But now I saw it differently. It was not an empty seat. It was a reminder of every person who had been standing nearby, waiting for someone to notice. And I realized something uncomfortable. I had spent my entire life believing I understood power, but I had never understood the responsibility that came with it. For the first time, I did not want to simply know what was happening inside my home. I wanted to understand the people who made it feel alive. I had spent years believing that accepting help was a weakness. It was easier to be the person who provided answers than the person who admitted there were questions I could not solve. But Emily Carter had shown me something I never expected. Sometimes the strongest people were not the ones who carried everything alone. They were the ones who continued moving forward even when nobody noticed how much they carried. After our conversation, I started seeing Emily differently. Not because her situation had changed, because my perspective had. I no longer saw her as someone who worked in my home. I saw her as someone who had built a life through patience, determination, and quiet strength. That realization made me uncomfortable because it forced me to confront something I had avoided for years. I had judged people by what I could see. I had rarely asked what existed beneath the surface. A few days later, I found Emily preparing supplies in the kitchen. She was organizing everything carefully, making sure nothing was wasted. It was the same attention to detail she showed every day. You always do everything perfectly, I said. She looked surprised when she turned around. I just try to do my job well. I shook my head. It is more than that. She smiled slightly. You notice things now. Her words caught me off guard. What does that mean? She placed a small container on the counter before answering. Before, you saw results. Now you are starting to see people. I did not know how to respond because she was right. The old version of me would have ignored that sentence. I would have considered it emotional instead of practical. But now I understood that emotional did not mean meaningless. That afternoon, I asked Emily if she and Lily would join me for lunch in the garden. It was not a formal meeting. There was no business discussion. No reason connected to work. I simply wanted to spend time with them. At first, Emily looked uncertain. Are you sure? She asked. It is just lunch, I replied. She smiled softly. For you, maybe. For us, it feels different. I understood what she meant. For years, She had existed near my world, but never truly inside it. That was something I wanted to change. When Lily arrived, she immediately started talking about a book she had finished. She explained every detail with complete excitement, and I found myself listening more than I had ever listened to anyone. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. Mr. Calloway, Lily asked suddenly, why do you always look so serious? Emily quickly looked embarrassed. Lily, that is not polite. But I laughed. It was a fair question. Maybe because I forgot how to relax, I answered. Lily thought about that for a moment. My mom says people forget things when they are too busy. I looked at Emily. She smiled because she knew exactly what Lily meant. That simple conversation stayed with me all day. Later, I walked through the house and noticed the difference between a place that was impressive and a place that was welcoming. My estate had always been beautiful, but beauty alone could not create warmth. It could not create memories. It could not make someone feel valued. That evening, I made a decision. I wanted Emily to understand that accepting support did not mean losing independence. It meant allowing people to stand beside you. I asked Margaret to prepare a new arrangement that would give employees with families more flexibility and support. When Emily heard about it, she came to my office again. You are changing everything, she said. I looked at her. Maybe some things needed to change. She was quiet for a moment. You know, I never expected someone like you to understand someone like me. I leaned back in my chair. Maybe that was the problem. I spent too much time thinking we were different. Emily looked at me carefully. And now, I looked toward the window where Lily was playing in the garden. Now I think everyone just wants to be seen. For years, I thought power came from being above others. But Emily and Lily were teaching me a different lesson. The greatest distance between people was not created by money or status. It was created when one person stopped seeing another. And I was finally learning how to see. I never expected a child to change the atmosphere of my entire home. I had spent years believing that a house was built with stone, design, and careful planning. But Lily Carter showed me that a home was created through moments that could never be purchased. A laugh in the hallway, a conversation during breakfast, a simple question asked without fear. Those were the things I had been missing. After I started spending more time with Emily and Lily, the mansion no longer felt like the same place. The rooms were still large. The walls were still covered with expensive artwork. The garden was still perfectly maintained. But the feeling had changed. It was no longer a place where everyone simply followed instructions. It was becoming a place where people felt comfortable being themselves. One afternoon, I walked into the library and found Lily sitting on the floor with books spread around her. She looked up and smiled. I found something interesting, she said. I looked at the book in her hands. What did you find? She pointed at a page filled with pictures of different places around the world. There are so many places people can live. How do they know where they belong? The question seemed simple, but it made me stop. Children had a way of asking things adults avoided. I think people know they belong when they feel accepted, I answered. Lily looked thoughtful. So a place is not really home because it is big? I looked around the library, a room filled with thousands of books, yet I had rarely spent time enjoying them. No, I said. A place becomes home because of the people inside it. When Emily entered the room a few minutes later, she heard the last part of our conversation. She smiled gently. That is something I have always tried to teach Lily. I looked at her. You have done a good job. Emily looked surprised by the compliment. Thank you. It was a small exchange, but I noticed something important. Emily was beginning to believe my words. Before, every kind gesture made her uncomfortable. She thought accepting anything meant she owed something in return. But slowly, she was learning that respect was not a transaction. It was something everyone deserved. That evening, I walked through the kitchen and saw Emily preparing dinner. Lily was sitting nearby, doing homework at the table. It was an ordinary scene. Nothing impressive. Nothing that would matter to anyone looking from the outside. But to me, it was one of the most meaningful moments I had experienced in years. I had attended important events. I had stood in rooms where people discussed millions of dollars. I had watched decisions affect entire organizations. Yet this simple moment felt more valuable than all of those memories combined. You look different, Emily said. I turned toward her. Different how? She smiled. Like you are finally here. Her words surprised me because I understood exactly what she meant. For years, I had been physically present everywhere I went. But mentally, I was always somewhere else. Planning, calculating, preparing for the next challenge. I had forgotten how to simply exist in a moment. Maybe I am learning, I said. Emily nodded. That is a good thing. The next morning, I made arrangements for a small reading corner in the garden. It was not a grand project. It was not something that would impress anyone. It was simply a place where Lily could read outside and where anyone in the household could spend time together. When Emily saw it, she stood quietly for a moment. You did this for her? She asked. I shook my head. I did this because this house needed a place like this. She looked at me carefully. You are changing more than the house, Adrian. I looked toward the garden where sunlight touched the flowers. Maybe the house was never the thing that needed changing. That night, I sat alone in my office and thought about the person I used to be. I had spent so much time building walls that I forgot walls also kept people out. Emily and Lily did not force their way into my life. They simply showed me what I had been missing. And slowly, without realizing it, they became the reason I no longer wanted to live behind those walls. I used to believe that the past was something people should leave behind. I thought moving forward meant forgetting the things that caused pain and focusing only on what came next. But I learned that some memories do not disappear because they are meant to teach us something. And sometimes, the truth we avoid is the one that helps us understand ourselves the most. After the changes inside my home began, I noticed something different about Emily. She was happier, but there was still a part of her that remained distant. She accepted the new arrangements. She smiled more often. She allowed Lily to enjoy the small moments she had once been afraid to accept. But there was still a quiet hesitation in her eyes, as if she was waiting for everything to disappear. One evening, I found her sitting alone in the garden after sunset. The lights around the walkway created a soft glow, and the entire estate was unusually quiet. You look like you are thinking about something important, I said. Emily looked up and smiled slightly. I guess I am. I sat across from her. Do you want to talk about it? She looked surprised by the question. Maybe because she was not used to someone asking without expecting anything in return. I do not know if it matters, she said. Everything matters, I replied. She looked toward the garden before speaking. I spent a long time believing that needing help meant I had failed. Her words were quiet, but I understood them. Why? I asked. Emily took a moment before answering. Because I watched people treat others differently when they discovered their struggles. I did not want Lily to grow up feeling like she was less than anyone else. I looked at her carefully. That was the moment I understood something I had missed before. Emily was not hiding because she was embarrassed. She was protecting the person she loved most. She was carrying everything silently because she wanted Lily to have a childhood without worry. You know, I said, I think I misunderstood strength for a long time. Emily looked at me. What do you mean? I thought being strong meant never needing anyone. But maybe strength is continuing to care even when life is difficult. She smiled softly. That sounds like something you would not have said before. I laughed quietly because she was right. The old me would have considered those words unnecessary. Now, they felt like the most honest thing I had said in years. A few days later, while organizing some old documents in my office, I found a small envelope that had been placed inside a drawer. It was not meant for me. It belonged to Emily. I almost put it back without looking. But then I noticed the date. It was from years earlier, shortly after she started working at the estate. I did not read it because I wanted to know her secrets. I read it because I wanted to understand the person who had spent years standing quietly in my world. Inside was a letter she had written but never sent. It described her hopes for Lily. It described her promise to create a better future for her daughter. It described gratitude for every small opportunity she received. But what stayed with me most was one sentence near the end. She wrote that she did not need someone to change her life. She only hoped someone would recognize that her life already had value. I closed the letter and sat quietly for a long time. Those words affected me more than any business decision I had ever made. I had spent years thinking people needed my solutions. But Emily had never needed someone to take control. She needed someone to see her. That evening, I returned the letter to where I found it. Some things belonged to the person who wrote them, but the lesson it gave me would stay with me forever. When Emily and Lily entered my life, I thought I was offering them a place in my world. I was wrong. They were showing me a world I had forgotten existed. A world where kindness mattered, where people mattered, where a person's worth was not measured by what they owned or what they could provide. And for the first time, I realized that the greatest thing I could give someone was not protection or comfort. It was the simple act of letting them know they were seen. I used to think changing a system meant changing the rules. I believed improvement came from creating stronger structures, clearer expectations, and better strategies. That was how I had always approached my life. Everything had a plan. Everything had a purpose. But I was slowly discovering that the most important changes were not written on paper. They were created through the way people felt when they were part of something. After everything I learned from Emily and Lily, I decided to look at my home differently. Not as a place I controlled, but as a place where people spent their lives. I started asking questions I had never asked before. Were people comfortable? Did they feel respected? Did they feel like they belonged? The answers were not always easy to hear. Some members of the household had worked there for years, but had never felt comfortable sharing their opinions. They were afraid of making mistakes, afraid of being misunderstood, afraid that their voices did not matter. I realized I had created an environment where everyone followed instructions, but very few people felt truly connected. One morning, I gathered everyone in the main hall. It was not a formal meeting. There were no documents, no business presentations, just a simple conversation. When everyone arrived, I looked around the room and saw faces I had recognized for years but never truly known. I want to change something, I said. The room became quiet. This house has always been organized. It has always been efficient. But I do not think that is enough. Some people looked surprised. They were used to hearing me speak about results, not feelings. A place is not successful because everything looks perfect. A place is successful when the people inside it feel valued. Emily stood near the back of the room, listening quietly. I could see the surprise in her expression. She had known me long enough to understand how different those words were from the person I used to be. After the meeting, small changes began. Nothing dramatic. Nothing designed to impress anyone. We created more flexible schedules for employees with families. We made spaces where people could take breaks comfortably. We encouraged everyone to share ideas without fear of judgment. It was not about giving people special treatment. It was about remembering that everyone had a life beyond their responsibilities. One afternoon, I found Emily watching Lily read in the garden. The reading corner we created had become one of Lily's favorite places. She had filled it with drawings, books, and small decorations that made it feel personal. She loves this place, Emily said. I looked at Lily smiling as she turned the pages of her book. So do I answered. Emily looked at me. The old you would never have said that. I smiled slightly. The old me would not have noticed it. She was quiet for a moment. What changed you? I looked toward the garden. The answer came easier than I expected. You and Lily. Emily looked surprised. Us. I nodded. You showed me that people do not always need someone to solve their problems. Sometimes they need someone to stand beside them. That evening, I returned to my office and looked through old records from years before. I noticed something I had never paid attention to. There were countless names of people who had contributed to my success. Employees, partners, people who had supported my vision. Yet I had always viewed those names as numbers and positions instead of individuals with stories. For the first time, I felt grateful in a way I had never allowed myself to feel. The next day, I found Lily drawing at the garden table. What are you making? I asked. She held up the paper proudly. It was a picture of the mansion, but there was something different about it. The picture showed people standing together outside the house. Why did you draw everyone here? I asked. Lily smiled. Because houses are happier when people are together. Her answer stayed with me. A child had explained something I spent decades trying to understand. The walls around us did not create belonging. The people inside them did. I spent years building an empire because I wanted to create something that would last. But now I understood that the strongest things were not made from stone or money. They were made from trust, kindness, and the moments people remembered. And for the first time in my life, I was not focused on leaving behind a powerful name. I was focused on creating a meaningful one. I used to believe that power meant never allowing anyone to question my decisions. For years, I built my reputation around certainty. People expected me to have answers. They expected me to remain calm, focused, and untouchable. But the more I changed, the more I realized something important. A person who refuses to listen eventually becomes trapped inside their own world. The hardest challenge was not changing the people around me. It was accepting that I was the one who needed to change. After the changes inside my estate began, not everyone understood them. Some people believed kindness was a sign of weakness. They thought a leader should remain distant, because distance created authority. I understood why they thought that way. It was the same belief I carried for most of my life. But I had started seeing things differently. One morning, I received a report about concerns from some longtime members of my organization. They believed the new approach inside my home would affect the way people viewed me. They believed I was becoming too open, too approachable, too different from the person they had known. I read the report quietly in my office. Years earlier, I would have immediately dismissed the criticism. I would have protected my image without thinking twice. But this time, I asked myself a different question. Was I protecting my image, or was I protecting my pride? That question stayed with me. Later that day, Emily found me sitting in the garden. She noticed something was on my mind. "You look like you are carrying something heavy," she said. I smiled slightly. "You are becoming very good at reading people." She sat nearby. Maybe because I spent years trying to understand what people were not saying. Her answer reminded me how different our lives had been. I had spent years making sure nobody could see my weaknesses. Emily had spent years hiding her struggles to protect someone else. We had both learned silence for different reasons. "Some people think I am changing too much," I told her. Emily looked toward the garden. "Are you?" I thought about it. "I do not think so. I think I am finally becoming someone I should have been earlier." She smiled. "Then why worry about what they think?" I looked at her. "Because change is easier when nobody questions it." Emily nodded. "But the changes that matter are usually the ones people question first." Her words stayed with me. That evening, I invited several members of my organization to meet with me. I did not prepare a speech. I did not create a presentation. I simply talked honestly. I told them that success was never created by one person alone. Every achievement had been built by people who contributed their time, effort, and trust. I told them that respect did not reduce authority. It strengthened it. Some people listened quietly. Some looked uncertain. But nobody interrupted. For the first time, I was not trying to convince people that I was right. I was trying to help them understand why I had changed. After the conversation ended, one of the senior members approached me. "I have worked with you for many years," he said. "I never thought I would hear you say those things." I smiled. "Neither did I." He laughed softly. "Maybe that is why they matter." That night, I walked through the mansion and found Lily drawing at the table again. She looked up and held up her picture. I made another one. I looked at it. This time, she had drawn everyone sitting together outside the house. "You added more people," I said. She nodded. "Because more people belong here now." I looked at the picture carefully. A child had captured something I was still learning. Belonging was not something people earned after proving their worth. It was something created when people chose to include each other. Later, I stood near the window of my office and looked across the estate. The place was still the same. The buildings had not changed. The gardens had not changed. But the meaning behind them had. I once believed leadership meant standing above everyone else. Now I understood that true leadership meant standing with people when they needed someone to stand beside them. Emily had never tried to change me. Lily had never asked me to become different. They simply showed me a version of myself I had forgotten existed. And that was the greatest lesson I ever learned. Sometimes the person who changes your life is not the one who gives you more power. Sometimes it is the person who quietly reminds you what power was supposed to mean in the first place. I used to think the hardest part of my life was carrying responsibility. The decisions, the expectations, the constant pressure to remain the person everyone believed I was. But I discovered something far more difficult. Letting people see who I truly was. For most of my life, I built my identity around control. I believed emotions created uncertainty. I believed closeness created risk. I believed keeping people at a distance was the only way to protect everything I had built. But Emily and Lily changed that without ever asking me to change. They simply showed me what life looked like when I stopped hiding behind the image I created. As time passed, the mansion became a place I actually wanted to return to. That was something I never expected. Before, I came home because it was where I lived. Now, I came home because it was where I felt understood. One evening, I found Emily sitting in the garden while Lily was reading nearby. The sunset covered everything in a warm golden light. It was one of those quiet moments that seemed ordinary but somehow felt important. "You seem happier lately," Emily said. I looked at her. "Do I?" She smiled. "Yes, you smile more." I almost laughed because I realized how unusual that sounded. A few months earlier, I would have dismissed that kind of observation as unnecessary. Now, it felt meaningful. "I think I forgot what happiness looked like," I admitted. Emily looked at me carefully. "And now?" I looked toward Lily, who was completely focused on her book. Now I think I am learning. There was a peaceful silence between us. Not the kind of silence created by distance. The kind created when two people felt comfortable without needing to fill every second with words. That was something new for me. The next week, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I wanted Emily and Lily to have a place that truly felt like theirs. Not because they were employees living under my roof. Not because I felt responsible for them, but because they were important to me. I asked Emily what she wanted. She looked confused. What do you mean? I mean, if you could change one thing about this house, what would it be? She thought about it for a moment. A small space where Lily can create things. Somewhere she can make a mess without worrying. I smiled. That sounds reasonable. When the room was prepared, it was not filled with expensive decorations. It was filled with colors, books, art supplies, and shelves for Lily's drawings. It was simple, personal, alive. When Lily saw it, her expression changed completely. This is for me, she asked. I nodded. Yes. She looked around the room carefully. Why? It was a simple question, but it mattered. I answered honestly. Because you deserve a place where you can be yourself. Lily smiled. Emily watched quietly. I could see emotion in her eyes, but she did not say anything. Later that evening, she came to my office. Thank you, she said. I looked up from my desk. You do not have to thank me. She shook her head. I do, but not because of the room. I waited. Because you finally understand something important. What is that? She smiled softly. That people are not projects to fix. They are people to know. Her words stayed with me. I realized how often I had looked at situations and immediately searched for solutions. I wanted to repair problems, organize outcomes, and create results. But people were not problems. They were stories. They were experiences. They were feelings. That night, I walked through the hallway and saw the framed photographs on the walls. For years, those pictures represented history and success. Now, I saw something different. I saw moments, connections, memories, the things that truly lasted. I once thought building a legacy meant creating something that would make people remember my name. But Emily taught me that a name was not what people carried with them. It was the way you made them feel. And Lily reminded me that even someone who had everything could still be missing something important. I had spent my life protecting an empire. Yet the greatest discovery was not something I found outside those walls. It was something I found inside myself. I found the ability to care without expecting anything in return. I found the courage to be seen. And most importantly, I found a family I never knew I was searching for. I used to believe that a person was remembered because of the things they achieved, the companies they built, the influence they created, the name they carried. For most of my life, that was the standard I followed. I measured success by results. I measured respect by reputation. I measured my worth by everything I could accomplish. But standing in the garden of my home, watching Lily red beneath the afternoon sunlight, I finally understood something I had missed for years. A life was not remembered by what it controlled. It was remembered by what it touched. Time had passed since the day I first noticed the empty chair in the dining room. A small detail that I once would have ignored had become the beginning of the biggest change in my life. The mansion was still the same from the outside. The tall windows, the beautiful rooms, the carefully designed spaces. But inside, everything felt different. It was no longer just a place filled with expensive things. It was filled with memories, morning conversations, shared meals, moments that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with being human. Emily and Lily had changed the way I saw the world. Not by giving me advice, not by demanding anything from me. They simply reminded me of something I had forgotten. People mattered more than achievements. One evening, I sat at the dining table and looked around the room. The same table where I once ate alone now held conversations and laughter. Lily was telling a story about a book she had finished. Emily was listening with a smile. I found myself quietly observing the moment. Years ago, I would have considered it ordinary. Now, I knew ordinary moments were often the ones people remembered the most. You are quiet, Emily said. I smiled. I am just thinking. About what? I looked around the room. About how much has changed. Emily followed my eyes. The house. I shook my head. Me. She smiled softly. I think you have changed in a good way. I thought about the person I used to be. Someone who believed showing emotion created weakness. Someone who thought needing others meant losing control. Someone who had everything except the one thing he truly needed. Connection. I spent years trying to build something nobody could take away from me, I said. Emily looked at me. And what did you build? I looked toward Lily. A life where I never needed anyone. There was a pause. But I was wrong. Emily did not answer. She did not need to. Sometimes understanding came from silence. The next morning, I walked through the estate and noticed small reminders of how much had changed. Lily's drawings on the refrigerator, books on tables, flowers placed around the house by Emily. Small signs that people lived here, not just worked here. Those details would have bothered the old version of me. Now, they made me smile. I realized that perfection had never been the goal. Belonging was. Later that day, I stood near the garden, where everything had started. I remembered the first time I saw Lily sitting alone. I remembered the questions that followed. I remembered discovering how much I had failed to notice. But I also remembered something else. Change did not happen because I had power. It happened because someone showed me a different way to use it. Emily never asked me to become a different person. Lily never expected anything from me. They simply gave me a reason to become better. That was the greatest gift anyone had ever given me. Looking back, I understand that the person I thought I was protecting was actually protecting me. I thought I was giving them a place in my world. In reality, they gave me a place in theirs. They showed me that kindness was not a weakness. That compassion was not a limitation. That a person could be powerful and still choose to be gentle. My name may have opened doors. My position may have earned respect. But the moments that truly mattered were the ones where someone smiled because I cared. That is the legacy I want to leave behind. Not a story about how much I owned. Not a story about how much influence I had. A story about how I finally learned to see people. Because in the end, the greatest thing a person can discover is not more power. It is the humanity they almost forgot they had.